Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN Weekly for Saturday, September 25th, 2021. And our top story today, we'll take a look at the Social Security financial outlook. Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Alicia Munell is the director of the Boston College Center for Retirement Research. Alicia, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, let's talk about a recent analysis you and the team at Boston College did with regards to the Social Security Trust Fund. Take us through this. I guess the overarching question is, should we have confidence in the American Social Security system?
Absolutely. It is going to be there. People in the future will get benefits. That said, the system faces a long-run mismatch between revenues and benefits, and there's sort of an action-forcing event coming up in the early 30s that Congress will have to act, or else benefits will be reduced, not eliminated, because we have this payroll tax coming in for decades.
Yeah, and Alicia, let's talk about the impact of COVID. We've experienced it from a health perspective. Many of us have experienced from a financial perspective. What has the impact of COVID been to the Social Security Trust Fund?
Let me take it the other way around for just a second. I think
Sure.
The whole COVID experience sort of once more demonstrated the importance of Social Security because when all hell broke loose, Social Security was there paying out benefit checks to retirees on a regular basis, paying out benefit checks to disabled persons on a regular basis, also acting as a safety net for older workers who were fearful to go into the labor force or go to work. They could claim their benefits early, not something that we recommend, but it was there for them. And so this is a program that is really the backbone of the retirement system, a program that everybody loves, a program that has just once again showed how important it is to have something that provides a steady source of retirement income. So in that sense, COVID demonstrated its worth. And in terms of the impact, I actually wrote a brief a little while back and said, COVID isn't a retirement story. The system's revenues were hurt in the short run. The system's benefits are going to go up in the short run because of this inflation as we come out of COVID. But basically, we have a long-run cost curve that's driven by demographics. We have a payroll tax curve that's really pretty constant. And so it had a temporary impact, but really no long-run impact on the finances. And it did accelerate this. Let me go back just for a second, because I
Sure.
said there is this action forcing event in the early 30s, because it just did move up the date of that by only 1 year. So basically, when you look at Social Security costs over the next 75 years, there's this gap between how much we've promised in benefits and how much we've are going to get in revenues. And so in the short term, what's happening is we have a trust fund that was created in 1983, and the interest and the assets in that trust fund bridges the gap so that the system can pay 100% of benefits through 2034. And after that, when we've used up all this trust fund revenues, we're going to have a gap so that the payroll taxes cover only about 3/4 of benefits. And so that's what we were worried about after 2034. And to go back to your COVID question, what COVID did is move the date at which the trust fund is exhausted from 2035 to 2034, which is not a dramatic change.
No, certainly not. And that's good to know, since it is the backbone of the U.S. retirement system. Let's talk about some of the assumptions. I think in reading your report by the team, you and the team, some of the long-term assumptions changed in terms of fertility, mortality. Can you just talk a little bit about what those changes are and how they impact the fund?
So interestingly, after we come out of this sort of terrible year, the trustees reassessed the long run assumptions and actually made 3 changes. And you would think that they'd be all going down or making things worse, but they actually made things better. So one was just how tightly we can run the economy. We can live with lower levels of unemployment. Lower levels of unemployment than we had in the past, which is good for the system. Fertility, they acknowledge that fertility is low now, that women are continuing to postpone when they have babies, but they think in the end, fertility will be at roughly 2 children per woman over her lifetime, which is a slight uptick from what they had before. And the third thing is death rates. Now, I don't want to be flip, but death is good for Social Security, because if people die, then you don't have to pay them benefits for so long. And so they did say that the improvement in death rates is not going to be as good as before. In fact, just more people are going to die at a higher rate than in the earlier report.
Yeah.
So that all those long run things improve the outlook.
So let's, I guess my last question here, Alicia, is let's talk about 2034. And we don't know what the world is going to look like even next week. But when we say that there's going to be a slight gap at 2034, what are some of the tools that the Congress, because I think this kind of sits with the U.S. Congress to make decisions on, right, with the executive branch and all the different facets there. What kind of tools are at the whim of the Congress to cure up that gap?
So Congress has all the tools it needs to do this. There have been decades of people making proposals on how to close the gap. It's a very, very simple system. It's not like healthcare. There's money coming in from taxes and there's money going out in promised benefits. And if you want to make the two the same, you have to change benefits or you have to change taxes. And this is something that Congress has all the power it needs to do that. And there are millions of ways of doing it. I personally don't think we should be cutting benefits. I look at the retirement system as a whole. I don't see middle-class people with a lot of money in their 401k plans. I'm not for cutting back. So my approach would be raising more revenues. There's no manna from heaven. There's no silver bullet here. That's what I would do. This is a program that American people really appreciate. I think if you put it to them, they would certainly be happy to make sure this system is sound. So basically, what are we talking about? How big, roughly? So the payroll tax rate would have to go up by about 3.5 percentage points. But the employer pays half and the employee pays half. So we're talking about under 2 on each side. And that's if you don't do anything with the tax base that you put it on. And so if you broaden the tax base by including in compensation employer contributions for health plans, or if you make people at higher levels have their earnings included in the tax base, which is not now because it's sort of capped at $144,000, then you wouldn't have to go up by a full, 1.5% each on the employer and the employee. So it's more revenues and doing it in a way that sort of minimizes the burden on the average worker.
Yeah, it's like a surgical procedure. You got to have some precision there. And I lied in terms of the last question. My apologies, Alicia. But while I have you, can we just talk a little bit about the cost of living adjustment? From what I've read, I mean, obviously very severe in 2022. But might you take us through how that relates to inflation and what could we see in the near future with regards to COLA?
So one of the wonderful aspects of Social Security is not only provides benefits for life, but benefits go up each year to reflect changes in the cost of living adjustment. And so for 2022, Social Security needs to know how much bigger the checks are going to have to be made. So that decision is based on the third quarter of 2021 over the third quarter of 2020. So we're kind of roughly 2/3 of this. We know 2020 for sure. We have 2 months of the 2021 numbers. And that looks like it's going to be roughly a 6% COLA. That'll be one of the highest we've had in a long time. But I suspect that it will go back, that inflation will go back down thereafter, and we'll get back to sort of more cost of living adjustments. The trustees did not have a full 6% COLA in their estimates, so costs are going to be a little higher than they had anticipated.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch when you take a step back and watch all this machination and decision making that has to be made. We're going to have to leave it there, Alicia. It's a pleasure to chat with you. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to having you and the team at CRR back on the program again very soon.
Oh, my pleasure. Take care.
Thanks, Alicia. Great to see you. Thanks for sharing your perspective. And when we come back, we'll take a look at some of our best segments for the week. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN Weekly. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms, especially for the smaller businesses? I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. On Wednesday, I sat down with DC REC members Aki Delaportis and Mackenzie Klaus to discuss real estate resiliency and inclusion in retirement portfolios. Let's take a look.
So Jeff, I would say at the beginning of the pandemic, many funds were taking a wait-and-see approach, really to see what the impact that COVID-19 would have on their real estate holdings and the valuation process. But if we take a step back and holistically, there are really two indices that the private real estate market uses as a benchmark. They are the NCREIF NFI Odyssey and NCREIF NPI indices. And as of 2Q21, performance for these two indices for the NCREIF NFI Odyssey, year-to-date 2021, they have a return of 5.64%, and trailing 1 year, so really covering the pandemic period, it's 7.09%. And then looking at the other indices, the NCREIF NPI, they have a year-to-date return of 5.37% and a 1 year trailing of 7.37%. I would say, though, performance on an individual fund basis, it's still very much a story of the haves and have-nots, and on where each fund will perform. And Aki actually If you could talk a little bit more on specific property type performance, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Mackenzie, you're absolutely right. Certain property sectors fared better than others. Industrial, for instance, benefited significantly from e-commerce activity, driving demand in the broader space. Investors piled into this asset class, capitalizing on rising rents and in a low capital intensive asset class. We have observed record pricing, virtually all segments of this sector, with the greatest yield compression in last mile property types. Investor demand has been the highest for coastal assets, but we're now seeing that expand into interior regions, given yields have increased or decreased significantly. There's also been significant rent growth over the last 12 months, especially on lease trade outs, with some approaching double digits. Apartments and other darling during the pandemic. There were some concerns at the onset, especially due to the lockdowns and some industries slowing down. There were concerns about rent collection rates, but stimulus programs and increased unemployment support helped keep collection rates from moving in the wrong direction, which was great. The job market also bounced back very quickly post-lockdown. As you know, that's the story on the news. There's no shortage of jobs currently. And it's really been a tale of two cities, Gateway versus Sunbelt, urban versus suburban, high rise versus low rise. Sunbelt markets have been on fire. The remote work has allowed workers to migrate to warmer cities and lower cost markets. As a result, gateway apartment markets like San Francisco were hit the hardest during the pandemic. With the exception of gateway markets, most rents have recovered, with some markets observing 15 to 20% new market lease trade out rates. And national occupancy and rent growth rates have never been higher. Our clients have a consistent need to diversify. And so there's a rebalancing that needs to occur on a recurring basis. We've actually observed some clients increase their allocations to direct real estate, in part due to concerns about inflation. Generally speaking, second quarter of 2020 screeched to a halt, very little activity. But since then, it's picked up significantly. Industrial, apartment, all of it in very high demand. And some of the other trends we're seeing is within the apartment sector, value add properties have also increased in demand as investors chase some of that yield, just given the fact that some of the core properties are have the lower yields. Retail and office, I think generally speaking, have been shied away from. The self-storage is one of those asset classes where new capital is chasing significantly. Another one of those asset classes that is performing very well post-pandemic and at record highs of market lease rates and occupancy.
Yeah, I would add to that as well. So as Aki mentioned, on the valuation front, from transactions that we are seeing, for industrial, like you mentioned, it's very much the coastal industrial assets are the ones that we're seeing that people are gravitating towards when it comes to transactions. And then for apartments, it's really that Sunbelt, like he mentioned. Sunbelt, the Southeast is really where everybody's gravitating towards. On the retail side, transactions, we are seeing a little bit of activity, but it's really on those high quality grocery anchored retail assets. And then office, there's a little bit, but office is still one of those asset class that people are really taking a pause on and just waiting to see what happens.
And that's driven largely due to the fact that companies have yet to develop their workforce strategy post-pandemic, and this is something that's going to unveil itself over the next few years. Private real estate fits into a professionally managed asset allocation fund in the same way that it would fit into a defined benefit pension plan. It's really diversifying your portfolio. This can be in a target date fund or a target risk fund within a defined contribution framework. It's a great long-term allocation strategy, and there's several reasons supporting that. One is you have low long-term correlations to other major asset classes like bonds, equities, which provides diversification in your portfolio. There's great stable income return. It's the largest component of the total return. driven by a private real estate investment. And generally speaking, a direct real estate investment will reduce volatility without sacrificing returns. And commenting on what I said earlier, inflation protection, direct real estate has historically outperformed during inflationary times.
And I think it helps too if we take a couple steps back. So as part of DCREC, we have established key principles for daily valuation of private real estate funds. And these principles provide structure yet flexibility to help meet the needs of all of these various funds when they're trying to be daily valued. And as part of our review of these guidelines, last year we actually did conduct a survey of the private real estate funds that offer daily valuation products. And the survey was asking, their adherence to these guidelines that were established within DCREC. And as a result of the survey, we found that 100% of the funds do adhere to these key principles that we did establish. Examples of these principles include engaging a third-party appraiser to value the real estate holdings, as well as overseeing the valuation process, recognizing material events on a timely basis, recognizing the income and capital return of your real estate and or debt holdings, and really having an established process and procedure in place for valuations in general. And then also considering your other assets and liabilities that you may have, including your partnership interests. Overall, our goal with this was to have our principles in place to help increase transparency, objectivity, integrity, and consistency across these types of products.
Yeah, investors are looking for investment opportunities that mirror their own beliefs. And many private real estate managers, as a result, are focused on ESG, both to appease investors, but also to seek out new areas of risk and opportunity and impacts in their portfolio and assets. These managers will utilize ESG optimization strategies, which can include performing energy audits, mechanical systems, investing in energy efficiency, perform interviews of their tenants to understand what their concerns are. And addressing those concerns will create stickier tenants and reduce downtime and turnover, and thereby improving performance. So these are all aspects that we're uber focused on within the private direct real estate industry. We're heading into hurricane season. Climate risk is a significant risk. Can lead to higher utility costs, maintenance costs, insurance bills due to weather-related disaster claims. Investor sentiment around climate risk has really increased significantly. It's really critical to the process. You want to make sure you fully understand what the risks are, so that you're not penalized today, 2 years from now, or 10 years from now after you look to exit a vehicle or real estate investment.
And on Thursday, I sat down with Dropping Dimes Foundation's Scott Tarter to discuss securing benefits for former ABA players. Let's take a look.
Dropping dimes is street basketball parlance for giving an assist. And so it's still talked about today. There's kind of a famous commercial that's out right now during ESPN coverage of NBA games that talks about dropping dimes. It's giving an assist in a basketball game. In 2014, Mel Daniels, the great Hall of Famer and former Indiana Pacer, was really concerned about these guys who played in his league, in this American Basketball Association. And he was concerned that they didn't have adequate health care, they did not have benefits from the NBA, they didn't have pensions. And so that concern led to discussions here in Indianapolis among a group of fans like myself and a guy named John Abrams, who were both friends of Mel, about starting a not-for-profit foundation to address that issue. So we formed Dropping Dimes to give assists to the former players of the ABA. They did. This is an exact replica of that basketball that they played with. And of course, at first, when the league started, there was some amount of making fun of that basketball. Red Auerbach famously called it a beach ball. But it was George Mikan's idea, one of the top 50 NBA players of all time. He was the first ABA commissioner. And the idea from the very beginning was to create a league that could compete with the NBA, a startup league, but that at first did not have the notoriety and did not have television contracts. And so the red, white, and blue basketball was one way that they thought they could entertain fans and differentiate themselves. The 3-point shot was another. A very fast, up-tempo style of play was another. The ABA brought the hardship rule. So when you see today's NBA players coming directly out of high school or now after 1 year of college going into the NBA under the hardship rule, that came directly from the ABA. So a ton of heritage, a ton of legacy of the ABA exists in the NBA today. George Mikan, the first commissioner, is one of the top 50 players of all time. Another, Julius Erving, of course, is one of the top 50 players of all time in the NBA and a Hall of Fame member as well. And he got his start with the Virginia Squires of the ABA. And really, his style of play came from sort of that the freewheeling kind of playground style of play, using his athleticism to beat players off the dribble, for example. That's exactly what you see in today's NBA. And Julius was the star of the ABA. Well, the ABA itself, because of its nature, it was a startup, the stepson to the NBA, and nobody really accepted it until later on in its history, right? So for the first 2 or 3 years, those teams were playing in relative obscurity, even though guys like future Hall of Fame players like Connie Hawkins and Louis Dampier and Larry Brown of NBA coaching fame, Mel Daniels, Roger Brown. These are all future Hall of Famers who are playing in the first years of the ABA in relative obscurity. But their entertainment value proposition worked. I mean, they put this amazing, entertaining style of play on the floor. And by the time you got to the 70s, Adidas was the official shoe of the ABA. Nike was making inroads at the time as a young company trying to get ABA players to wear their shoes. Ice Gervin, Artis Gilmore, Dan Issel, household names in the NBA in the later 70s and the 80s were all coming out of the ABA. And so in 1976, we at Dropping Dimes, we hate to even refer to that as a merger, because what really happened is the NBA won. The NBA won the competitive war. And as a result of that, the ABA teams were folding. They were just folding right and left. The only 4 financially viable teams were the Nets, Nuggets, Spurs, and Pacers. The NBA came in and said, we'll do an expansion. We'll include those 4 teams, but you're each going to have to pay us $3.2 million and give up draft choices for several years. So they were really hampered coming into the league. And every other team just died, either because their owners cut a deal with the NBA to go away, or because they just didn't make it. And so the players, were just left in the rearview mirror in 1976. Those who did not, those lucky, fortunate few who went on into the NBA were fine and ultimately had NBA pensions. But the guys who were left behind, were cut off mid-contract, no future healthcare benefits, no pension.
That wraps up this episode of BRN Weekly. Have a topic of interest, somebody you think we should talk to, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're backing in tomorrow for BRN Sunday. I'll be joined by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news for the week. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.